Grace wiped down the marble countertop one last time, making sure every surface in the kitchen sparkled. It was almost 7 in the evening and her feet ached from being on them since 6 that morning. She'd already worked her other cleaning job from midnight to 5, caught a quick nap on the subway, and then headed straight to the Sterling mansion in Manhattan's Upper East Side. This was her life now. 2 jobs, barely any sleep, and a schedule that left little room for anything else. But she never complained. Not out loud anyway. Her daughter Lisa needed her, and that college fund wasn't going to build itself. The Sterling penthouse was the kind of place Grace had only seen in magazines before she started working there 3 years ago. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. The living room alone was bigger than her entire apartment in Queens. Everything was white and chrome and expensive. Grace had learned early on not to touch anything unless she was cleaning it. She gathered her supplies from under the sink, listening to the quiet hum of the place. Mrs. Sterling was in her study, probably on another video call with her interior designer. Mr. Sterling was somewhere in Asia on business. He was always somewhere on business, and little Christopher was upstairs in his room, likely playing video games or doing homework. The boy was 8 years old, skinny with dark hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes. Grace had a soft spot for Christopher. He was different from his parents. While Mr. and Mrs. Sterling barely looked at her, Christopher would sometimes say hello. He'd even asked her name once, which had surprised her so much she'd almost dropped the vase she was holding. Most days, though, she was invisible to all of them. Just another piece of furniture that cleaned up after itself. She was heading toward the supply closet when she heard it. A scream, high-pitched and terrified. Mrs. Sterling's voice coming from upstairs. Grace's heart jumped into her throat. She dropped her cleaning caddy and ran toward the stairs, her tired legs suddenly moving faster than they had all day. Something was very wrong. She could hear it in that scream. Christopher. Christopher, wake up. Mrs. Sterling's voice was frantic now, bordering on hysteria. Grace took the stairs 2 at a time, her mind racing. She'd worked in enough homes, seen enough emergencies with her own daughter to know that sound. That was the sound of a mother watching her child in danger. She burst into Christopher's room to find Mrs. Sterling on her knees beside the bed, shaking the boy's shoulders. Christopher was on the floor, his body jerking in strange, violent movements. His eyes had rolled back. Foam was forming at the corners of his mouth. His lips were turning blue. Oh God, what's happening? Mrs. Sterling's hands fluttered uselessly. Her face was pale, her perfectly applied makeup streaking with tears. She looked at Grace like she was drowning, and Grace was the only lifeline. Help him. Do something. Grace's training kicked in before her brain could catch up. Years ago, before Lisa was born, she'd worked as a nurse's aide. She'd seen this before. Anaphylactic shock, severe allergic reaction, the body shutting down. She dropped to her knees beside Christopher, her hands already moving to check his pulse. Weak. Too weak. His breathing was labored, wheezing. His throat was closing up. Where's his EpiPen? Grace demanded, her voice sharp and clear. He needs epinephrine now. I don't... Mrs. Sterling looked around wildly. In the bathroom. The medicine cabinet. Grace ran. The bathroom was enormous, all white tile and gold fixtures. She yanked open the medicine cabinet, her hands shaking now. Bottles and boxes tumbled out. She found the EpiPen case and ripped it open, empty. Where's the spare? She shouted, running back to the bedroom. There is no spare, Mrs. Sterling sobbed. He used it last week at school. I was supposed to refill it, but I forgot. Grace's blood ran cold. No EpiPen. No emergency medication. And Christopher's face was getting darker by the second. Call 911, Grace ordered, pulling out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. I already did, Mrs. Sterling cried. They said 20 minutes. There's a huge accident on 5th Avenue. All the ambulances are stuck. They said to wait. They said they're coming as fast as they can, but we have to wait. 20 minutes. Grace looked at Christopher's tiny body convulsing on the floor. His chest was barely moving now. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. He didn't have 20 minutes. He probably didn't have 5. Time seemed to slow down. Grace could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She thought about Lisa, about all the times her daughter had gotten sick or hurt and Grace had moved heaven and earth to help her. She thought about being a mother, about what it meant to love a child so much you'd do anything, risk anything to keep them safe. Christopher wasn't her son. She was just the maid. She could wait for the ambulance like they said. Do nothing and hope for the best. Stay in her lane. Keep her job, but he was dying. Right there on the expensive carpet in his superhero pajamas. This little boy who'd always been kind to her was dying, and she was the only one who could do anything about it. Grace made her decision in half a heartbeat. "Where are your car keys?" she asked Mrs. Sterling. "What?" "Your car keys." "Where are they?" "The driver has the night off." "The car's in the garage, but I can't drive right now. I'm shaking too much. I can't. I'll drive." Grace was already scooping Christopher into her arms. He was so light, too light. His head lolled against her shoulder. "Which hospital is closest?" "Mount Sinai. But that's 30 blocks from here in this traffic." Grace wasn't listening anymore. She was moving, carrying Christopher out of the room, down the hallway toward the stairs. Mrs. Sterling followed, still crying, still talking, but her words had become background noise. The private elevator was too slow. Grace couldn't wait. She pushed through the door to the stairwell and started down 12 floors, carrying Christopher like he weighed nothing. Adrenaline made her strong. Fear made her fast. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. She didn't care. Behind her, Mrs. Sterling's voice echoed in the stairwell. "Wait, Grace, wait. I'm calling my husband. I'm calling my lawyer." "You can't just take him." Grace kept running. She'd worry about lawyers later. She'd worry about her job later. She'd worry about everything later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the child in her arms and the seconds ticking away. She burst out of the building into the cool October evening. The doorman looked up in shock. "Medical emergency," Grace shouted. "I need a taxi, now." The doorman immediately stepped into the street, waving his arms. New York City at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening was chaos. Cars honked. People rushed past. Nobody wanted to stop. "Please," Grace whispered, looking down at Christopher's pale face. "Please don't leave yet, baby. Stay with me. Just stay with me." A yellow taxi finally screeched to a stop. Grace threw open the door and climbed in, cradling Christopher against her chest. "Mount Sinai Hospital," she gasped. "Fast as you can. This child is dying." The driver took one look in his rearview mirror and didn't ask questions. He hit the gas. Grace held Christopher tight as the taxi wove through traffic. She could feel his heart beating against her chest. Weak, but still there. Still fighting. She pressed her hand against his forehead. He was burning up. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're going to be okay. I've got you. I've got you, sweetheart." She'd never called him that before. Never called him anything but Christopher or the boy when talking to the other housekeepers. But right now, in this moment, he was just a child who needed help. Just a scared little boy, and she was the only person standing between him and the worst. The taxi driver was doing his best, but traffic was terrible. They moved in fits and starts, stopping and going, horns blaring all around them. Grace watched the meter climb. $7, $9, $12. She'd left everything in the penthouse. Her purse, her wallet, her Metro card. She patted her uniform pocket and found $17 and some change. That was it. That was all the money she had on her. "How much to Mount Sinai?" she asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "From here? In this traffic?" "Probably 25, 30 bucks, the driver said. Grace's stomach dropped. She didn't have $25. She didn't have enough. But then she remembered something. 2 blocks from where they were stuck in traffic, there was a small urgent care clinic. She'd passed it 100 times on her way to work. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't equipped for major emergencies, but it would have medicine. It would have a doctor. It would have a chance. "Change of plans," Grace said. "Turn left at the next light. There's a clinic 2 blocks from here." "Lady, you said Mount Sinai." "I know what I said. The clinic, please." She looked down at Christopher. His breathing was so shallow now, his little chest barely moving. They were running out of time. The driver made the turn. 90 seconds later, they pulled up in front of a small storefront clinic wedged between a dry cleaner and a deli. The meter read $14.60. Grace handed the driver her $17. "Keep the change. And thank you. Thank you so much." She kicked the taxi door open and ran into the clinic, Christopher limp in her arms. The waiting room was nearly empty. Just an elderly man reading a magazine and a young woman with a bandaged hand. Behind the reception desk, a surprised-looking woman in scrubs looked up. I need a doctor, Grace said. Her voice was steady, but her whole body was shaking. Right now. This child is in anaphylactic shock. He needs epinephrine immediately. The receptionist took one look at Christopher and hit a button under her desk. 30 seconds later, a door flew open and a doctor in a white coat rushed out. She was young, maybe 30, with her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Exam room 3 now, the doctor ordered, already moving. How long has he been like this? Maybe 15, 20 minutes, Grace said, following her down a narrow hallway. Allergic reaction. His EpiPen was empty. Ambulance was delayed. They burst into a small exam room. The doctor laid Christopher on the table and immediately started working. She grabbed a stethoscope, listened to his chest. Grabbed a pen light, checked his eyes. Her hands moved fast but steady. No wasted motion. Get me 0.3 milligrams of epinephrine intramuscular, she called to a nurse who'd appeared in the doorway, and set up an IV. We need fluids and we need them 5 minutes ago. Grace stood back against the wall out of the way, her arms feeling empty without Christopher's weight. She watched the doctor work, watched the nurse bring supplies, watched as they injected the medicine into Christopher's small thigh. Come on, buddy, the doctor murmured. Come on, work with me here. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Christopher lay still, his face gray, his lips blue. Grace thought about Mrs. Sterling back in that penthouse. About Mr. Sterling somewhere on the other side of the world not knowing his son was dying. About Lisa, who'd never forgive her mother if she didn't come home tonight. Then Christopher's chest hitched. Once. Twice. His breathing changed, became deeper. Color started to creep back into his face. His eyelids fluttered. That's it, the doctor said softly. There you go. Christopher's eyes opened. They were unfocused, confused, but they were open. He was breathing. He was alive. Grace's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, tears streaming down her face. She covered her mouth with both hands to hold in the sob that wanted to break free. The doctor glanced back at her. You saved his life. Another few minutes and we'd be having a very different conversation. That was good thinking, getting him here. But Grace wasn't thinking about being praised. She was thinking about what she'd just done. What she'd really just done. She'd left her job without permission. She'd taken her employer's child out of the house without authorization. She'd made medical decisions that weren't hers to make. She'd spent money that wasn't hers. She'd acted like she had the right to do any of this when she was just the maid, just the help. The receptionist appeared in the doorway. I have Mrs. Sterling on the phone. She wants to speak to whoever's in charge. Grace closed her eyes. Here it comes, she thought. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, about to come crashing down. But when she looked at Christopher, now breathing steadily with an IV in his arm and color in his cheeks, she knew she'd do it all again, every single second of it. Some things were more important than keeping your job. Some things were worth any risk. She just hoped the Sterlings would see it that way. Grace stood up slowly, her legs still shaky. Through the small window in the exam room door, she could see Mrs. Sterling burst through the clinic entrance. The woman's hair was disheveled, her designer coat thrown on wrong, one sleeve inside out. She looked nothing like the polished, perfect woman Grace cleaned for every day. Where is he? Where's my son? Mrs. Sterling's voice carried down the hallway, sharp with panic. The doctor stepped out to meet her, speaking in low, calm tones. Grace couldn't hear the words, but she saw Mrs. Sterling's face crumple with relief. The woman pushed past the doctor and rushed into the exam room. Christopher! She grabbed his hand, pressing it to her cheek. Oh, baby, oh, my baby. Christopher's eyes were clearer now, though he still looked confused and exhausted. Mom? His voice came out scratchy and small. I'm here. I'm right here. Mrs. Sterling was crying openly now, not caring that her mascara ran in dark streams down her face. She looked up at the doctor. Is he going to be okay? Tell me he's going to be okay. He's stable now, the doctor said, but he needs to stay here for observation. We'll keep monitoring him for at least the next few hours. Anaphylaxis can sometimes have a secondary reaction. He's not out of the woods yet, but he's doing much better. Mrs. Sterling nodded, not taking her eyes off Christopher. Then, as if remembering something, her gaze shifted to Grace. The relief in her face hardened into something else. Something cold, you, Mrs. Sterling said. The single word hung in the air like an accusation. Grace felt her mouth go dry. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling, I know I should have asked, but there wasn't time. You took my son. Mrs. Sterling's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more frightening. You took my child out of our home without my permission. I was trying to save his life. You're the maid, Grace. The maid. You had no right to make that decision. No right to touch him, to move him, to bring him here. Mrs. Sterling stood up, still holding Christopher's hand but facing Grace fully now. Do you have any idea what you've done? What could have happened? You could have dropped him on those stairs. That taxi could have crashed. This clinic could have made a mistake. You put my son's life in danger. Grace felt like she'd been slapped. In danger? Mrs. Sterling, he was dying. The ambulance wasn't going to make it in time. You don't know that. You're not a doctor. You're not qualified to make those kinds of decisions. Mrs. Sterling's voice was rising now. You overstepped. You way overstepped. And there will be consequences for this. The doctor cleared her throat. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but this woman saved your son's life. If she hadn't acted when she did, I don't recall asking for your opinion, Mrs. Sterling snapped. Then she pulled out her phone. I'm calling our family attorney and hospital security. Grace, you need to leave, now. Grace looked at Christopher. The boy was watching her with wide eyes, his small hand still in his mother's grip. She wanted to say something to him, to explain, but what could she say? That his mother was wrong? That sometimes doing the right thing got you punished? She turned and walked out of the exam room, her legs feeling like lead. In the waiting area, she sank into one of the plastic chairs and put her face in her hands. What had she done? What had she really done? 20 minutes later, the receptionist approached her with a clipboard. Ma'am, I need you to fill out some paperwork for the patient you brought in. Grace took the clipboard with trembling hands. Patient information. Insurance information. Billing information. She stared at the forms, her vision blurring. Then she saw it. At the bottom of the first page, estimated cost of treatment, $4,800. Her heart stopped. $4,800. She made that in 3 months, working both her jobs combined. She didn't have insurance that would cover someone else's child. Christopher wasn't her dependent. This wasn't her bill to pay, but legally she'd brought him in. She'd authorized treatment, at least by bringing him through those doors. I can't pay this, Grace whispered. The receptionist's face softened with sympathy. The patient's mother is here. She'll handle it, but Grace knew better. She could hear Mrs. Sterling's voice in the exam room, sharp and angry, talking to someone on the phone, talking about unauthorized medical decisions, talking about lawsuits. An hour crawled by. Then another. Grace sat in that waiting room watching people come and go. A kid with a sprained ankle, an old man with a cough, normal people with normal problems who'd go home to their normal lives. Finally, Mrs. Sterling emerged. 2 men in suits flanked her. One carried a briefcase. The other had a security badge clipped to his belt. Grace Thompson, the man with the briefcase, said, I'm Richard Hayes, attorney for the Sterling family. We need to discuss what happened this evening. Grace stood up, her whole body tense. Is Christopher okay? The child is stable and will be transported to Mount Sinai Hospital for overnight observation, the lawyer said in a flat, professional voice. Now, regarding your actions tonight, you removed a minor from his legal guardian's care without permission. You transported him across the city. You authorized medical treatment without parental consent. These are serious matters, Ms. Thompson. I saved his life, Grace said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. That's debatable, the lawyer replied. You made decisions that weren't yours to make. You could have waited for the ambulance. You could have kept the child calm and safe until proper medical personnel arrived. Instead, you took it upon yourself to play hero, and in doing so, you violated several laws and certainly violated the terms of your employment contract. Grace felt the room spinning. My employment contract? Effective immediately, your services are no longer required by the Sterling family. You're terminated for gross misconduct. You'll receive no reference, and I strongly advise you not to speak to any media outlets about the family or tonight's events. Any violation of the non-disclosure agreement you signed will result in legal action. The world tilted sideways. Grace grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. You're firing me? For saving your son's life? Mrs. Sterling stepped forward, her face pale but composed now. The messy, terrified mother from earlier was gone, replaced by the cold woman Grace had always known. You crossed a line tonight, Grace, multiple lines. I know you think you did the right thing, but you put yourself in a position you had no business being in. What if something had gone wrong? What if Christopher had died in that taxi? We would be liable. Our family would be destroyed. You didn't think about any of that? I thought about a little boy who was dying, Grace said, her voice breaking. That's all I thought about. And that's exactly the problem. Mrs. Sterling's eyes were hard as diamonds. You thought. You decided. You acted. But none of that was your place. You're the help, Grace. You follow instructions. You don't make life or death decisions about other people's children. The security guard touched Grace's elbow. Ma'am, I need to escort you from the premises. Grace pulled her arm away. Wait, the bill? The medical bill. Who's paying for Christopher's treatment? The lawyer and Mrs. Sterling exchanged a glance. That bill is in your name, the lawyer said smoothly. You brought the patient in. You authorized the treatment. The clinic has your information on file as the responsible party. But I don't have that kind of money. That's not the Sterling family's concern. You made an unauthorized decision. You deal with the consequences. The lawyer closed his briefcase with a sharp click. Consider yourself fortunate we're not pressing charges. Many families would. Grace felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. Can I at least say goodbye to Christopher? Absolutely not, Mrs. Sterling said. You've done enough. Stay away from my son. Stay away from my family. The security guard's grip on her elbow was firmer this time. Grace let herself be led toward the exit, her mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. She'd saved a child's life, and somehow she was the villain in this story. At the clinic door, she turned back one last time. Through the window, she could see Christopher being wheeled out on a gurney. He was awake, looking around. His eyes found hers for just a moment. He raised one small hand in a weak wave. Grace waved back, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Then the door closed and he was gone. She stood on the sidewalk in the October night alone. No purse, no phone, no wallet. She checked her pockets. Empty. She'd given the taxi driver her last $17. It was 9:30 at night. She was in Manhattan, and her apartment in Queens was an hour away by subway. She didn't have money for the train. She didn't have anything. Grace started walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just walked. Her feet carried her down streets she didn't recognize, past restaurants with warm golden light spilling onto the sidewalk, past shops closing for the night, past people heading home to their families. After 6 blocks, she found a subway station. She stood at the entrance, staring down into the fluorescent-lit stairwell. Maybe she could talk to the station attendant, explain her situation. People did that sometimes, right? When they lost their wallet or got robbed. But Grace had never begged for anything in her life. She'd worked for everything she had. 2 jobs, 6 days a week, barely sleeping. All to give Lisa a better life. All to make sure her daughter wouldn't have to scrub toilets and wash other people's dishes like Grace did. And now, it was all falling apart. She thought about that bill. $4,800. If she didn't pay, it would go to collections. Her credit would be ruined. She'd saved for 3 years to get her credit score high enough to qualify for a small apartment. 3 years of being careful, of paying every bill on time, of saying no to Lisa when she asked for things they couldn't afford. All of that, destroyed in one night. Grace sank down on the sidewalk, her back against a brick wall. She pulled her knees to her chest and finally let the tears come. She cried for her job, for her future, for Lisa's college fund that would now have to pay a medical bill instead. She cried for Christopher, who she'd never see again. She cried for the unfairness of it all. A couple walking past gave her a wide berth. A man in a business suit quickened his pace. To everyone else, she was just another person having a bad night in the city. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if she was okay. After a while, the tears stopped. Grace wiped her face with the sleeve of her uniform. The same uniform she'd put on that morning, thinking it would be just another ordinary day. 12 hours ago. It felt like 12 years. She needed to get home. Lisa would be worried sick. Her daughter was 17, old enough to be home alone, but Grace was never this late without calling. Lisa would be imagining the worst. Grace stood up and started walking again. If she couldn't take the subway, she'd walk. Queens was far, maybe 2 hours on foot, but she'd make it. She had to. Somewhere around Block 15, her feet screaming in protest, a police car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. "Evening, ma'am," the officer said. He was young with kind eyes. "You okay? It's pretty late to be walking alone." Grace thought about lying, about saying she was fine, just out for a stroll. But she was so tired, so incredibly tired. I'm trying to get home, she said. Queens. I don't have subway fare. The officer studied her face. Rough night? The roughest. He nodded slowly, then spoke to his partner. They had a brief conversation Grace couldn't hear. Then the back door opened. Come on, the officer said. We'll give you a ride. Can't have you walking through the city alone this late. Grace climbed into the back of the police car, grateful beyond words. As they drove through the city streets, she stared out the window at the lights blurring past. In a few hours, the sun would come up. Life would go on, but nothing would ever be the same. She'd lost her job. She'd gained a debt she couldn't pay. She'd saved a child's life and been punished for it. And the worst part? Grace knew she'd do it again. If she went back to that moment, if she had to choose all over again, she'd still scoop Christopher up and run. She'd still risk everything, because that's what it meant to be human. To see someone suffering and not be able to look away. To act when action was needed, even if it cost you everything. The police dropped her off in front of her building at 11:15. Grace thanked them and climbed the 4 flights to her apartment. Lisa met her at the door, tears streaming down her face. Mom, where have you been? I've been calling and calling. Grace pulled her daughter into a hug and held on tight. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I lost my phone and I couldn't call, and it's been a really, really long day. Lisa pulled back, studying her mother's face. What happened? Mom, what's wrong? Grace thought about the explanation she'd have to give. About the job she'd lost and the bill they couldn't pay, and the future that had just gotten so much harder. But that conversation could wait until morning. Right now, she just wanted to hold her daughter and be grateful they still had each other. I'll tell you everything tomorrow, Grace said softly. Right now, I just need to be home. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Grace wondered if the Sterlings were tucking Christopher in at Mount Sinai. She wondered if he was scared, if he was asking for her, if he understood why she wasn't there. She hoped he knew she'd tried, that she'd done her best, that sometimes doing the right thing didn't have a happy ending, at least, not right away. Grace woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the sound of Lisa moving around in the kitchen. For one beautiful moment, she forgot everything that had happened. Then reality crashed back in and her stomach twisted into a knot. She had no job. She had a massive medical bill. And she had to tell her daughter that everything they'd worked for was now in jeopardy. Lisa was making toast when Grace shuffled into their tiny kitchen. Her daughter took one look at her face and put down the butter knife. Okay, Mom, talk to me. What happened yesterday? Grace poured herself coffee with shaking hands and sat down at their small table. Then she told Lisa everything. The whole story, start to finish. Christopher's allergic reaction, the empty EpiPen, the run down the stairs, the taxi ride, the clinic, Mrs. Sterling's fury, the firing, the bill. Lisa's eyes grew wider with each detail. When Grace finished, her daughter sat in stunned silence for a long moment. They fired you, Lisa finally said. They actually fired you for saving their kid's life. They said I overstepped, made decisions that weren't mine to make. That's insane. Lisa's voice rose. You're a hero, Mom. You saved that little boy. Heroes don't get fired and stuck with bills they can't pay, Grace said quietly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, needing the warmth. Lisa, honey, we need to talk about what this means. I still have my night cleaning job at the office building, but that's only bringing in about $1,200 a month. Our rent is $950. That leaves almost nothing for food, utilities, everything else. And now we have this medical bill hanging over us. Lisa's face paled. What about my college fund? Grace's heart broke all over again. They'd saved $3,000. It wasn't much, but it was something. A start. Lisa had been planning to go to community college, work part-time, make it work. She was smart, so smart. She'd gotten good grades despite having to help her mom make ends meet. She deserved better than this. We might have to use it, Grace admitted, to pay down the medical bill, to keep us afloat until I can find another job. No. Lisa stood up abruptly. No, Mom, that's not fair. You saved someone's life and now you're being punished for it? This is wrong. This is so wrong. Life isn't always fair, sweetheart, then we make it fair. Lisa grabbed her phone. I'm posting about this. On social media. Let people know what the Sterlings did to you. Let everyone see how they treated you. Lisa, no. Grace reached for her daughter's hand. I signed a non-disclosure agreement. If I talk to anyone about the family, they'll sue me. And even if they didn't, who's going to believe me over them? They're billionaires. I'm just a maid. They have lawyers and PR people and money to make any story go away. So they just get away with it? They just destroy your life and face no consequences? Grace pulled Lisa into a hug. Sometimes that's how the world works. The powerful stay powerful. The rest of us just survive however we can. But surviving was proving harder than Grace expected. Over the next 2 weeks, she learned just how bad things could get. She applied for dozens of jobs. Housekeeping positions, cleaning services, retail work, anything. But without a reference from the Sterlings and with a 3-year gap in her resume that she couldn't properly explain, no one would hire her. She couldn't tell potential employers the truth without violating the non-disclosure agreement. She couldn't lie because they always asked for references. She was stuck in an impossible situation. The clinic started calling about the bill. First polite reminders, then firmer request, then warnings about sending her account to collections. Grace tried to negotiate a payment plan, but even the smallest monthly payment they'd accept was $300. She didn't have $300. Some weeks she barely had 30. She picked up extra hours at her night cleaning job, working from 11 at night until 6 in the morning, then spending the day applying for other work. She was exhausted all the time, running on coffee and anxiety. She lost weight. She couldn't sleep. When she did sleep, she had nightmares about debt collectors and eviction notices, and Lisa having to drop out of school. Lisa tried to help. She picked up shifts at a fast food restaurant after school, bringing home $75 a week. It wasn't much, but it kept them in groceries. Grace hated watching her daughter come home smelling like fryer grease, her young face tired and stressed. 17 years old and already carrying the weight of the world. This isn't your burden to carry, Grace told her one night as they counted out bills at the kitchen table. You're my mom, Lisa said simply. Your burdens are my burdens. That's how family works. 3 weeks after the incident, Grace came home from her cleaning shift to find an official-looking envelope taped to her apartment door. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was an eviction notice. They were 2 weeks behind on rent, and the landlord wanted them out by the end of the month. That gave them 10 days. Grace slid down the wall right there in the hallway and put her head in her hands. 10 days. Where were they supposed to go? She'd been apartment hunting already, knowing this was coming, but everywhere wanted first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. She didn't have that kind of money. She didn't have any money. She thought about calling her sister in Baltimore, but they hadn't spoken in 5 years after an argument Grace could barely remember now. She thought about shelters, but the idea of taking Lisa to a homeless shelter made her physically ill. She thought about her car, but she'd sold it 2 years ago because she couldn't afford the insurance. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Grace felt truly hopeless. That night, she couldn't hide her despair from Lisa. Her daughter came home from her shift at the restaurant to find Grace crying at the kitchen table. The eviction notice in front of her. Mom? Lisa's voice was small, frightened. What's that? Grace couldn't speak. She just pushed the paper across the table. Lisa read it, her face going white. No, they can't do this. We're behind on rent. They can do whatever they want. Where are we going to go? I don't know, baby. I don't know. Lisa sat down heavily, and for the first time since this started, Grace saw her daughter cry. Really cry. Not just tears, but deep body-shaking sobs. All the fear and stress and unfairness of the past few weeks pouring out. Grace moved around the table and held her daughter while they both cried. She'd tried so hard to be strong, to protect Lisa from the worst of it. But there was no protecting her from this. They were losing their home. They were losing everything. I should have just let him die, Grace whispered into her daughter's hair. I should have waited for the ambulance like they said. Lisa pulled back sharply. Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare. You did the right thing, Mom. You saved that little boy's life. If the world is punishing you for that, then the world is broken, not you. The world being broken doesn't pay our rent. I know. Lisa wiped her eyes. But we'll figure something out. We always do, but Grace didn't see how. She'd already sold everything of value they owned. Her grandmother's ring, gone. Her laptop, gone. Lisa's bike that she'd saved up to buy, gone. Their TV, their microwave, anything that might bring in a few dollars. Their apartment was practically empty now, just beds and a table and the bare necessities. The next morning, Grace went to the church down the street. She'd never been particularly religious, but she was desperate. The pastor was a kind older man named Father Miguel who listened to her story without judgment. "The problem isn't finding you emergency housing," he said gently. "We have some resources for that. The problem is what comes after. You need steady income. You need a job that pays enough to support you and your daughter. Without references, without being able to explain your last position, that's almost impossible." "I know," Grace said, "but I have to try. I have to do something." Father Miguel studied her for a long moment. "What if you told your story? Not to violate any agreement, but just the facts. What happened? How you helped someone, how you're being punished for doing the right thing. Sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they want to help." Grace shook her head. "The Sterling family has lawyers. They'll come after me." "Let me rephrase," Father Miguel said carefully. "What if someone else told your story? Someone who heard it from someone who heard it from someone. No names mentioned. No specific details that could identify the family. Just a story about injustice, about a woman who saved a child and lost everything. Would that violate your agreement?" Grace thought about it. I don't know. Maybe not, but who would even care? I'm nobody." "You'd be surprised," Father Miguel said. "The world is full of people who still believe in doing the right thing, who still believe that heroes shouldn't be punished. Let me make some calls." Grace didn't hold out much hope, but she had nothing left to lose. She went home, helped Lisa pack their belongings into the few boxes they had, and tried not to think about the fact that in a week, they'd be homeless. 2 days later, Grace's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Grace Thompson?" A woman's voice, professional but kind. "Yes? My name is Patricia Chen. I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News. Father Miguel from St. Anthony's suggested I give you a call. He told me you might have a story worth sharing." Grace's heart started pounding. "I can't talk to reporters. I signed papers, I understand. And I'm not asking you to break any agreements. But Father Miguel told me the basics. About how you helped someone and it cost you everything. I'd like to do a story about workers' rights. About the impossible positions people are put in. I wouldn't use your full name. I wouldn't mention the family involved. Just the situation. The injustice of it. Why would you do that?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Because 5 years ago my little sister had an allergic reaction at a party. A janitor working at the venue saw what was happening and got her to a hospital. That janitor got fired for leaving his post. My sister lived. That man lost his job. I've always regretted that we never did anything to help him. Maybe I can help you instead." Grace closed her eyes. "If I do this and the Sterlings figure out it's me, they'll destroy me. They'll sue me for everything I don't have. I'll be careful. I promise. We won't use any identifying details. But your story deserves to be told. And maybe, just maybe, telling it will change something." Grace thought about Christopher, about his small hand waving goodbye through that clinic window, about how she'd probably never know if he was okay, if he remembered her, if he understood why she'd done what she did. She thought about Lisa, packing their life into boxes because they'd be on the street in less than a week. She thought about every person who'd ever had to choose between doing the right thing and protecting themselves. Every person who'd been punished for showing compassion. "Okay," Grace said quietly. "I'll talk to you. But not on camera, and not using my real name, and that's fine. I'll send you an address. Can you meet tomorrow?" The next day, Grace took the subway to a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Patricia was waiting in a back corner booth, a small recording device on the table. She was younger than Grace expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Grace told her everything. The allergic reaction, the run down the stairs, the taxi, the clinic, the firing, the medical bill, the eviction notice, all of it. Patricia didn't interrupt, just listened and took notes. When Grace finished, the reporter sat back and shook her head. "This is worse than I thought," Patricia said. "You did everything right and the system failed you completely." "The system worked exactly how it was designed to work," Grace said bitterly. "To protect rich people from consequences. I was never supposed to matter. People like me are just supposed to stay invisible and accept whatever happens to us." "Not anymore," Patricia said. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Give me 3 days. I need to verify some facts, talk to some legal experts, build the story properly. But Grace, I promise you, I'm going to make people care about what happened to you." Grace wanted to believe her. She wanted to hope that telling her story might change something, might help somehow. But hope felt dangerous now. Hope felt like something she couldn't afford. She went home to their half-packed apartment, to her daughter doing homework at their bare table, and tried to figure out how they'd survive the next week. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that her story, told carefully and anonymously, would reach millions of people, that one of those people would be the person she least expected, that sometimes when you hit rock bottom, the only way left to go is up. But she didn't know any of that yet. Right now, all she knew was that in 5 days she and Lisa would be on the street. And no amount of doing the right thing had saved her from that fate. 3 days passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Grace and Lisa continued packing, continued preparing for the inevitable. They'd found a motel that rented rooms by the week, cheap and run down, but it was shelter. Grace had scraped together enough for 1 week's stay. After that, she had no idea what they'd do. On the third evening, Lisa was at work and Grace was taping up their last box when her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia, the reporter. Story airs tonight at 6. Wanted you to know. I think it turned out well. I hope it helps. Grace's stomach flipped. She'd almost forgotten about the interview in the chaos of everything else. She glanced at the clock. 5:45. She didn't have a TV anymore. They'd sold it 2 weeks ago. But she had her phone. At exactly 6 o'clock, Grace pulled up the Channel 7 News live stream on her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. The news anchor appeared, a woman with perfect hair and a serious expression. Tonight we bring you a special report about a troubling trend in our city. Workers being punished for doing the right thing. Our reporter Patricia Chen has the story. The screen switched to Patricia, standing outside a generic-looking building. Imagine you're at work when you witness a medical emergency. A child is dying. The ambulance can't get there in time. You have the skills to help, but helping means leaving your post without permission. What would you do? The story unfolded on Grace's small screen. Patricia had done exactly what she promised. No names, no identifying details, just the story of a woman, a domestic worker, who'd saved a child's life and lost everything because of it. Patricia interviewed a labor lawyer who talked about the impossible positions workers were put in, a medical expert who confirmed that the woman's quick thinking had absolutely saved the child's life, an ethics professor who called the situation a moral travesty. This woman did what any of us would hope someone would do if it were our child dying, Patricia said, looking directly into the camera. She acted with courage and compassion, and for that she was fired, billed for medical expenses she couldn't afford, and is now facing eviction with her teenage daughter. She asked us not to use her name out of fear of legal retaliation. Think about that. A woman who saved a child's life is too afraid to even publicly say she did it. The segment ended with Patricia giving the address for a fund that Father Miguel had set up at the church. If you'd like to help this woman and her daughter, donations can be made here. But more importantly, this story should make us all ask ourselves what kind of society punishes people for showing basic human decency. Grace sat on the floor of her nearly empty apartment, staring at her phone long after the segment ended. Her hands were still shaking. It felt strange hearing her story told like that. Like it was something important. Something that mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lisa, who must have watched on her break at work. Mom, I'm crying in the bathroom at work. That was your story. You're amazing. I'm so proud of you. Then another text. This one from Father Miguel. The phone at the church is ringing off the hook. People want to help. Grace, I think something wonderful is about to happen. Grace didn't let herself hope. Not yet. Hope was dangerous. But over the next 24 hours, something unexpected happened. The story went viral, not just locally but nationally. People shared it on social media. They commented. They argued. They cared. The fund Father Miguel had set up reached $5,000 by the next morning. Then 10,000. Then 20. Complete strangers, people Grace would never meet, were sending money to help her and Lisa. Grace cried when Father Miguel called to tell her. There's enough to pay your medical bill, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Enough to cover several months of rent. Enough to give you breathing room to find proper work. I don't understand, Grace whispered. Why do they care? They don't even know me. Because your story reminded them that the world still needs people who do the right thing even when it's hard. You gave them hope, Grace. And now they want to give some back to you. But that wasn't even the most surprising part. 2 days after the story aired, Grace was at the motel where she and Lisa had moved temporarily. It was barely noon on a Saturday. Lisa had gone to the laundromat down the street. Grace was sitting on the edge of the lumpy bed, filling out more job applications on her phone, when someone knocked on the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment she froze, paranoid thoughts racing through her mind. What if it was the Sterling family's lawyers? What if they'd figured out the news story was about her? What if they were here to serve her with papers? The knock came again, firmer this time. Grace opened the door a crack, her heart pounding. Mr. Sterling stood in the hallway of the cheap motel. The billionaire looked completely out of place in his expensive suit, his polished shoes, his watch that probably cost more than Grace made in a year. He looked tired. His eyes were red like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was slightly messy. "Ms. Thompson," he said quietly, "may I come in?" Grace's first instinct was to slam the door. Her second was to run. Instead, she heard herself say, "How did you find me?" It wasn't easy. "But I have resources." He glanced down the dingy hallway. "Please, I need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes." Every instinct told Grace this was a bad idea, but she was tired of being afraid, tired of running. If he was here to threaten her, let him do it to her face. She opened the door wider and stepped back. Mr. Sterling walked into the small, shabby room. He looked around, taking in the water-stained ceiling, the worn carpet, the single bed, the stack of boxes in the corner. Something in his face crumpled. "Is this where you're living now?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "For now. Until we figure something else out." Grace crossed her arms, trying to look braver than she felt. "What do you want, Mr. Sterling? If you're here to threaten me about that news story, I didn't use any names. I didn't violate the agreement. I'm not here to threaten you." He turned to face her fully. "I'm here to apologize," Grace blinked. "What?" "I saw the news segment. I didn't know who it was about at first. My wife and I watched it together and she said, 'That sounds familiar.' Then we started putting the pieces together. The timeline, the circumstances, the fact that you disappeared after we fired you." He ran a hand through his hair, making it messier. "Christopher figured it out before we did. He's been asking about you every day since that night, asking where you went, why you don't come to the house anymore. He has nightmares, Ms. Thompson. Not about the allergic reaction. About you, about me." Grace's voice cracked. "He dreams that you're gone because of him, that he did something wrong and that's why you left. He's 8 years old and he's carrying guilt that should never have been his to carry." Mr. Sterling's voice broke. "Because we failed him." "We failed you. And we've spent the last 3 weeks trying to pretend we did the right thing when we know we didn't." Grace sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. This wasn't what she'd expected. Not at all. "My wife was in shock that night," Mr. Sterling continued. "She panicked. She lashed out at you because she couldn't face the fact that she'd frozen when our son was dying. That she was useless while you, someone we barely noticed, someone we treated like furniture, saved his life." He sat down in the room's single chair. "That doesn't excuse what we did to you. Nothing excuses it, but I need you to understand that we weren't thinking clearly. We were scared and angry and looking for someone to blame. So you blamed me," Grace said softly.